Kill her before she reaches the base. Sorokov said it the way a man orders breakfast, flat casual without looking up from the map. Then he drove his knife straight through the intelligence report pinned to the table, through the photograph, through the face of the girl with the old rifle. A child with a museum piece, he said, and they call this an asset. He pulled the knife free, turned to his lieutenant. His voice dropped to something that made the room go cold. If she sets 1 foot inside that wire, 1 foot you bring me her head. Not a report, her head. That order would be the first mistake of his last war. Before we get into this story, if you're watching right now, subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story can travel. Now let's go back to the mountain. The supply truck arrived at FOB Raven Ridge 47 minutes before sunset. Nobody was particularly excited about it. Supply runs to Raven Ridge were routine ammunition rations replacement, parts, the occasional bag of mail that took 3 weeks to arrive and smelled like someone had sat on it. The Marines on base duty had seen hundreds of these trucks roll through the eastern gate, and not one of them had ever carried anything worth getting worked up about. So when Corporal Dennis Ruiz heard the engine grinding up the mountain road, he didn't even put down his coffee. He leaned against the gatepost, squinted at the dust cloud behind the truck, and said to the man beside him, "You think they remembered the coffee filters this time?" Private Aaron Stills shrugged. "They forgot them 3 times in a row. At this point, I think somebody's doing it on purpose." Ruiz snorted. "Probably." The truck stopped. The engine cut. The tailgate dropped. And the first thing that came off that truck was a rifle. Not in a case, not in a bag, wrapped in old cloth, the kind of cloth you'd use to wrap something you found at a flea market, not something you were carrying into a combat zone. The cloth was worn through at the corners. The strap holding the bundle together looked like it had been retied so many times it was more knot than strap. Whatever was underneath the wrapping was long and heavy and clearly not new. The second thing that came off the truck was the person carrying it. She was 23 years old, though most people who saw her for the first time guessed younger. She wasn't tall. She wasn't built the way most people expected someone in her position to be built. She wore standard issue clothing, no unit patches, no rank visible. Her hair was dark, pulled back tight. Her face was calm in a way that wasn't relaxed. It was the calm of someone who had decided a long time ago that showing what she was thinking was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her name was Elena Walker. She stepped off the truck, and before she did anything else, before she checked in, before she looked at the base layout, before she acknowledged the 2 men staring at her from the gate, she turned east. She looked at the ridge. Corporal Ruiz watched her do it. He watched her eyes travel along the ridgeline, slowly, methodically, the way you'd read a page of text. Her head moved in small increments. She was looking at something, or looking for something, and whatever it was, she was looking very, very carefully. Then she turned back, adjusted the wrapped rifle on her shoulder, and walked toward the gate like she owned the road. Ruiz and Stills exchanged a glance. "That's the shooter," Stills said quietly. Ruiz looked at the bundle on her shoulder. "Apparently. She looks like she's in high school." "Yeah. And what is that thing she's carrying that can't be a service rifle?" Ruiz studied the cloth-wrapped bundle for a moment. "Looks old. Old like vintage or old like broken? Old like both, maybe." By the time they processed her through the gate, word had already spread the way. Word always spreads on a small forward operating base instantly and with embellishment. By the time Elena reached the equipment check-in point, there were 9 men within earshot who had all already decided she was a mistake. Sergeant First Class Gary Holloway was the loudest of them. Holloway was 38 years old, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, a jaw like a concrete block, and the absolute unshakable confidence of a man who had never once been seriously wrong about anything, or at least had never been made to feel that way. He stood with his arms crossed and watched Elena approach the check-in table with the expression of a man watching someone park badly. "Walker," he said, reading from the clipboard. "Elena Walker, Combat Applications." He looked up. "You're the sniper." "Yes," she said. He looked at the bundle on her shoulder. "What's that, my rifle?" Holloway stared at the cloth-wrapped bundle for a long moment. He reached out and tapped it once with 2 fingers, felt the shape of it beneath the cloth, and his expression shifted from skeptical to openly amused. "That's not a modern service weapon," he said. No, she agreed. What is it? It works, she said. That's what it is. Holloway looked at the men around him. Two of them were already smiling. A third one, a young lance corporal named Davies, let out a short laugh. He tried to disguise as a cough and completely failed. It works, Holloway repeated slowly as if tasting each word. Okay, all right. He made a small note on his clipboard. We'll get you squared away. Rack assignment is building 4. Welcome to Raven Ridge, he paused. Try not to trip over your rifle on the way there. The men around him laughed. Elena didn't. She picked up her pack, adjusted the bundle on her shoulder, and walked toward Building 4 without looking back. But as she walked, she was still looking east. Her eyes kept moving back to the ridge. Even while navigating between buildings, even while passing groups of men who watched her go by with varying degrees of curiosity and dismissal, her attention kept returning to that ridge line, the way a compass needle returns to north. She couldn't help it, because something up there was wrong. She didn't know exactly what yet. That was the thing about reading a battlefield. The first read was never precise. It was instinctive, a kind of pattern recognition that happened below conscious thought, a feeling that arrived before the evidence assembled itself into something explainable. She had learned years ago to trust that feeling before she could explain it, because by the time you could fully explain it, it was sometimes too late to act on it. Right now, the feeling was this: that ridge had been studied. Not casually, not the way a local shepherd might know the landscape, not the way a bird learns where the wind comes from. It had been studied the way a surgeon studies an X-ray before making a cut. Purposefully, precisely, with intent. Someone had looked at this base very carefully from that ridge, and they had already decided something. She dropped her pack in Building 4, sat on the edge of the assigned rack, and began unwrapping the rifle. The cloth fell away in layers. What appeared was not what most people would have expected. It was a bolt-action rifle, long and lean, with a stock that had been repaired in 2 places with materials that weren't original. The barrel showed wear at the crown that suggested it had been cleaned obsessively thousands of times. The scope was mounted with a precision that contradicted the apparent age of the weapon, positioned and locked with the kind of exactitude that comes from someone who has re-zeroed the same optics so many times they could do it in complete darkness. The metal had the dull, unreflective finish of something that had never once been left in a condition that could catch light at a bad moment. It was old. It was worn. Every single part of it had been cared for the way a craftsman cares for a tool they have made into an extension of their own hands. Elena ran a dry patch through the barrel, checked the bolt travel, confirmed the 0 on the scope from memory, and then set the rifle across her lap and sat quietly for a moment with her eyes closed. She was listening. A bass has a sound. Every bass has its own particular sound, the rhythm of it, the movement patterns, the places where voices cluster, and the places where they go quiet. She had learned to read basses the same way she read terrain. From sound and rhythm alone, you could map the flow of a place, understand where authority sat and where it didn't reach, feel the confidence level of the people inside the wire. Raven Ridge sounded confident, maybe too confident. The voices were easy, unhurried. The patrols she could hear moving past the building were casual, present, but not alert. These were men who felt safe inside their perimeter, which was exactly what Sorokov would want them to feel. She opened her eyes. She needed to talk to the base commander. Colonel Nathan Vance had been at Raven Ridge for 11 months, which was about 9 months longer than most people expected anyone to stay sane at an altitude posting this remote. He was 51, lean in the way that comes from 11 months of base rations and very little sleep, with gray at his temples that hadn't been there when he arrived. He ran his base with the methodical discipline of a man who understood that in a remote mountain posting, discipline wasn't a virtue, it was the thing between you and catastrophe. I was reviewing a logistics report when Sergeant Holloway knocked on his doorframe. "Sir, the new shooter wants a meeting." Vance set down the report. "Now, she's been here about 40 minutes. He looked up. "Send her in." Elena entered and stood at the position of attention with a formality that was not quite military in its posture, more like the posture of someone who had learned to inhabit many different institutional environments and had adopted their external forms without fully belonging to any of them. "At ease," Vance said. "Walker." "Yes, sir." "You want to brief me?" "I want to report an observation, sir." He leaned back in his chair. "In the 40 minutes since you arrived." "Yes, sir." He studied her for a moment. There was something in her manner that he couldn't immediately classify, not arrogance, not nervousness, something quieter than either. Certainty maybe, the kind of certainty that doesn't feel the need to announce itself. Go ahead, he said. The eastern ridge, she said, the high ground above the secondary approach. Before I entered the wire, I ran a preliminary scan from the gate. There are at least 4 positions on that ridge that show evidence of recent occupation. The ground disturbance pattern isn't consistent with local movement. It's consistent with deliberate positioning. Whoever was up there wasn't passing through. They were watching. Vance didn't immediately respond. He held very still. Watching for how long in your estimation? Based on what I could see from ground level, days minimum, possibly longer. We run ridge patrols. On a schedule, she said. And then she stopped because she didn't need to finish the sentence because Vance was already completing it in his own mind. And she could see from the slight change in his expression that he understood exactly what she meant. A scheduled patrol tells an observer when you're coming, and more importantly, when you're not. What kind of force are we talking about? He said. I can't give you numbers yet, she said. I need elevation and time. 1 night on the observation post, sir. 6 hours. I can give you a better picture by morning. Vance was quiet for a moment. Holloway told me you carried in an old rifle. Yes, sir. His words were, and I'm quoting, something that belongs in a war museum. Elena didn't smile. I've heard variations of that before, sir. Does it bother you? She looked at him steadily. The rifle shoots where I point it, Colonel. That's the only thing that matters. Vance looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Get yourself to the observation post. I want to report at 00600. Yes, sir. She turned to go. Walker, he said. She stopped. What made you look at the ridge first before you even cleared the gate? She thought about it for a second, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she was deciding how much of the answer to give. Because if I were going to attack this base, she said, that's where I would start. She walked out. Vance sat at his desk for a moment after she left, not looking at anything in particular. Then he picked up his radio. Sergeant Holloway caught her outside Building 4. He wasn't alone. Davies was with him and a bigger man named Kowalski, who'd been at Raven Ridge for 6 months and had the slightly unearned swagger that comes from 6 months of nothing happening. Walker to Holloway said, it wasn't a greeting, it was a check. The kind of verbal check that's designed to establish who stops and who doesn't. Elena stopped. Just so you know, Holloway said, we do things a certain way up here. We've been running this base without incident for 18 months, she said. He paused. Right. I know the base record, she said. I read the file on the flight in. He looked at her for a moment, recalibrating. Point is, we've got a system that works. And when new personnel come in with ideas about how to change, I'm not here to change your system, Sergeant, she said. I'm here to do one job, my job. With that, Kowalski said, gesturing vaguely at the wrapped rifle she was carrying, again thing. With this rifle, yes. Kowalski shook his head with the easy confidence of someone who had never once been made to feel uncertain about himself. I've got nothing against you personally, but whatever that is, it's not a combat-grade precision weapon. The tolerance on something that old. Do you want to know the effective range, she said. He stopped. What? Do you want to know what this rifle can do at distance? What tolerances it holds? What the acceptable wind variance is at 800 meters versus 1,000? She tilted her head very slightly. Because I can walk you through all of it. Or you can take my word for it and let me go do my job. Kowalski looked at Holloway. Holloway looked at Elena. There was a moment, a specific crystalline moment, where the social gravity of the exchange shifted. It was subtle, and Holloway was too proud to acknowledge it, but Elena felt it, and so did Davies, who had gone very quiet. Do your job, Holloway said finally. The words came out like a door closing. Thank you, Sergeant, she said, and she walked past them toward the observation post. She didn't look back, but she heard Kowalski mutter something behind her, and she heard Holloway's response, which was quiet and which she couldn't make out entirely, except for the last 2 words. The last 2 words were, watch her. She filed that away. The observation post at Raven Ridge sat on the highest point of the base perimeter, a reinforced platform with sight lines in 3 directions, sandbag walls that had been repacked imperfectly about 6 months ago, and a gap in the eastern-facing wall that was 3 inches too wide and pointed directly at the ridge. Elena noticed the gap immediately. She set her rifle on the rest, adjusted the position of the sandbag to close half the gap, positioned herself behind the scope, and began to work. A sniper at an observation post does not simply look. The untrained eye sees a scope pressed to an eye and assumes the person is searching for targets. What Elena was actually doing was something closer to cartography. She was constructing a map not on paper but in her memory, building a three-dimensional model of the eastern ridge based on what her scope revealed. The shadows, the sight angles, the places where wind would behave predictably, and the places where it wouldn't. The dead ground, where a person could move without being visible from the base, and the firing positions from which the base would be most exposed. She moved her point of observation in a slow, systematic grid. She was patient. Patience was something you either had or you didn't, and no amount of training manufactured it from scratch. Elena had always had it. Even as a child, she had been able to hold stillness longer than anyone around her, hold it and wait and watch and let the picture emerge at its own pace rather than forcing it. The picture that emerged now over the first 2 hours was alarming. Not because there were enemy fighters on the ridge. She'd suspected that from the moment she stepped off the truck. What alarmed her was the sophistication of the concealment. She found the first position, a natural rock formation on the left shoulder of the ridge, only because a single blade of dry grass moved against the wind direction. Not with it, against it, which meant something behind it had disturbed the air pattern. She marked it in her mind, kept moving. 40 minutes later, she found the second. This one gave itself away by the absence of something, a gap in the thermal shimmer along a specific rock line that should have been continuous. Something was absorbing heat where the rock wasn't, something warm, something living. She marked that one too, kept moving. Around midnight, she was working the upper ridge when she saw something that stopped her completely. A pattern of movement, not one person, but a coordinated shift. 3 figures changing positions in a sequence that wasn't random. It was a rotation, deliberate, time professional. This was not a small reconnaissance team. This was a prepared force running security on a prepared position. And then in the brief moment when the cloud cover shifted and moonlight touched the ridge, she saw something that made her chest go cold. A silhouette, a single figure, standing at the highest point of the ridge, looking down at the base, not observing casually, standing the way a commander stands surveying what is already his. Elena had seen that posture before. 3 years ago, in another country, in another disaster. She knew the shape of him, even at distance. Knew it the way you know the shape of a nightmare you've had so many times it has become familiar. The breadth of the shoulders, the stillness, the absolute unhurried certainty in the way he held his ground. Colonel Dmitry Sorokov. Her hands on the rifle were perfectly still. She had been in this exact position before Crosshair's available shot, possible every physical condition favorable, and she had not taken it. She had hesitated, and 5 people had died because of that hesitation. She would not make that mistake again. But she also knew that tonight was not the moment, because Sorokov wasn't here for her. He didn't know she was here yet. And if she fired now before she understood the full scope of what he'd prepared, she would trigger an attack on a base that wasn't ready. She pulled back from the scope and sat very still for a moment in the dark. Her hands were still steady. That was the thing about being this frightened, real fear, the kind with history in it, the kind that comes from memory rather than imagination. It didn't make your hands shake. It made them very, very still. She reached for her radio. "Vance," she said. A pause. "Then go ahead. I need you at the observation post. Right now, sir. This is not a request." Another pause, longer this time. And then quietly, "I'm on my way." She put the radio down and pressed her eye back to the scope. Sorokov was gone from the high point. But the positions she'd marked, 2 confirmed, at least 2 more probable, were still out there, waiting. She thought about the men sleeping in the buildings behind her. The men who had laughed at her rifle, who had called her a child, who had decided before she said a single word that she had nothing to offer. She thought about them sleeping while the ridge above them was being mapped, while Sorokov positioned his pieces, while the clock they didn't know was running counted down. She thought they don't know what's coming. And then with a flatness that she recognized as the specific emotional state she entered when everything became very serious, she thought, they're going to know. Because I'm going to tell them, and then they're going to have to decide whether they believe me. And what they decided was going to determine whether anyone on this base was alive by the following night. She heard boots on the ladder behind her. Colonel Vance pulled himself up to the observation post, looked at her and said, "What did you find?" She turned from the scope, and when she spoke, her voice was completely level, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she had learned long ago that fear in your voice doesn't make people take you more seriously. It does the opposite. At least 4 confirmed observation positions on the eastern ridge, and she said, "Running a rotation, professional security pattern, and sir," she stopped for a single breath, "I need to tell you that this is not a standard reconnaissance element." "What is it then?" "It's a command position," she said. "Someone is up there who is not just observing. Someone is up there who has already decided to attack this base. And they are waiting for something. I don't know what yet, but they're not waiting much longer." Vance looked at her in the darkness of the observation post. He looked at the ridge. He looked back at her. "You're certain?" "Yes, sir." He was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough that she felt the weight of it. "All right," he started finally. "Walk me through what you saw." And she did. She walked him through everything. The 2 confirmed positions, the 2 probable ones, the rotation pattern, the thermal gap, the blade of grass that moved against the wind. She described the movement with the precision of someone who had encoded it permanently, the way you encode things that you know might be the difference between life and not. She didn't use the name Sorokov, not yet. That was a different conversation, and this was not the moment for it. When she finished, Vance was quiet again. Then he said, "Why haven't they already moved?" "Because they're not ready," she said. "They're still setting something up. Maybe communications. Maybe a supporting element that hasn't arrived yet." She paused. "Or maybe they're waiting for us to relax." Vance looked out at the ridge. The clouds had closed back over the moon, and the ridge was dark and quiet and completely unreadable to the untrained eye. "I'm going to increase perimeter watch," he said. "Double the rotation." "I want," sir said. "Can I make a request?" He looked at her. "Don't change the patrol pattern," she said. He stared. "You want me to leave the patrols as they are?" "Yes." "While there's a prepared assault force on that ridge?" "Yes, sir, because if we change the pattern, they know we've spotted them. And if they know we've spotted them, they move the timeline. We don't want them to know we know." "Not yet. Right now our advantage is that they think they're invisible." She met his eyes. "Let them keep thinking that until we're ready." Another long silence. Then Vance said something that surprised her. He said, "You've done this before." It wasn't a question. She was quiet for one moment. "Yes, sir," she said. "I have." He nodded slowly. "Get some sleep," he said. 3 hours. Then back here." He turned and started down the ladder. Then he stopped halfway down and looked back up at her. "Walker." "Sir." "The rifle," he said. "Whatever they're saying about it." He paused. "Don't let it get in your head." She looked at him for a moment. "It never does," she said. He nodded, and he climbed down, and she listened to his boots move away across the base, and then she was alone again with the scope and the dark ridge and the thing she hadn't told him yet. The name on the ridge, the face at the high point, the ghost from 3 years ago who should have been in a different country in a prison or in the ground. She pressed her eye back to the scope. The ridge stared back at her, silent and full of secrets. She could wait. She had been waiting for 3 years. She could wait one more night. Elena was back at the observation post before the first light hit the ridge. She had taken the 3 hours Vance gave her, but she hadn't slept. She'd lain on the rack in Building 4 with her eyes open, running the ridge through her mind the way you run a math problem, checking each variable, testing each assumption, looking for the things she might have missed. Because in her experience, the thing you missed was never the obvious thing. It was always the small thing, the thing that seemed unimportant until it wasn't. She hadn't found anything she'd missed. That almost made it worse. By 5:45, she was back behind the scope. By 6, she had a report ready. By 6:03, Vance was standing beside her, and Holloway was standing behind both of them with his arms crossed and his expression set to the particular configuration that says, "I am listening because I was told to listen, not because I think this matters." Elena laid it out clean and fast. No hedging, no qualifications beyond what were genuinely warranted. 4 confirmed observation positions, 2 probable. A rotation pattern consistent with a trained security element. Movement on the high point, consistent with command presence. Timeline estimate, If the supporting element they were waiting for arrived within the next 12 hours, the attack window opened before the following dawn. When she finished, the observation post was quiet. Holloway was the one who broke it. Based on what evidence exactly, he said. A blade of grass, a gap in some shimmer. Based on a pattern, Elena said. Not one data point, a pattern. Patterns can be coincidence. This one isn't. You've been on this base for less than a day, Walker. You don't know what normal looks like up here. You don't know what the local movement patterns. Sergeant, Vance said quietly. Holloway stopped. Vance didn't look at him. He was looking at the ridge. What do you need from me? He said to Elena. Time and access, she said. Let me spend today mapping the full ridgeline. I need to know every position they built up there before this kicks off. And I need someone to come with me to the perimeter wire, someone who knows the base well enough to tell me what's normal and what isn't. Holloway made a sound that was not quite a laugh. You want a tour guide? I want someone who's been here long enough to notice what's changed, she said, and she looked at him when she said it, held the look steady. That could be you, Sergeant, if you're willing. The offer sat in the air between them. Holloway recognized it for what it was, not a compliment, not deference, but a pragmatic use of the resource available. She needed his knowledge. She was asking for it directly. Refusing it would mean choosing pride over the job. He looked at Vance. Vance looked back at him with an expression that said nothing and communicated everything. Fine, Holloway said. The word came out flat as a plank. They were walking the wire by 0700. It took 11 minutes for Holloway to see the first thing that changed his face. They were at the northeastern corner of the perimeter. Elena moving slowly along the fence line with her eyes down when she stopped and crouched. She pointed at the ground without saying anything. Holloway crouched beside her, looked and went still. The dirt at the base of the fence had been compressed in a way that was not consistent with the surrounding soil. Not a footprint. Whoever had done it was too careful for a full print. But the disturbance was there. Someone had pressed against this section of fence from the outside. Recently, within the last 24 hours, given the moisture content still visible at the edges of the compression. We patrolled this section last night, Holloway said. His voice had changed. It was quieter. What time? 2200. This happened after 2200, she said, after your patrol came through. Holloway looked at the compression in the dirt. He didn't say anything for a moment. They're testing the fence, she said, looking for weak points, looking for where the reaction time is slowest. She stood. This is not the only spot, I guarantee it. They found 3 more before noon, each one at a different section of the perimeter, each one placed at maximum distance from a guard post. Each one tested after the previous patrol rotation. Whoever was doing it knew the schedule, knew it cold. By the time they finished the circuit, Holloway was not the same man who had walked it with her. I didn't say anything about the rifle. He didn't make any reference to the morning briefing or to his own skepticism from the night before. He just walked and looked and was quiet in the way that serious men go quiet when they realize they have underestimated something. At the end of the circuit, he stopped and looked at the ridge for a long moment. Then he said, "How long do we have?" "I don't know exactly," she said. "But I don't think we have more than one more day." He nodded once slowly. Then he turned and walked back toward the command building, and Elena watched him go, and she thought, good. One more, because she needed them to believe her before it started. Not after. After was too late. She just didn't know yet whether one more would be enough. The answer came 90 minutes later, and it came fast. Private Stills, the same young man who'd been at the gate when she arrived, came running across the base at a pace that wasn't quite panic, but was close enough to draw every eye on the compound. He found Elena outside Building 4 and skidded to a stop in front of her. "You need to come to the North Post," he said, breathing hard. "Right now." "What happened?" "Corporal Ruiz found something on the fence line, Section 7. He says, still stopped, reorganized. He says he doesn't know what it is, but he thinks you will." She was moving before he finished the sentence. Section 7 of the north fence was where the perimeter came closest to the base of the ridge approach. It was also not coincidentally the section with the longest gap between patrol passes, 7 minutes at the fastest, 9 at the average. Elena had noted it on the morning walk, had thought if I were them, this is where I'd test hardest. Ruiz was crouched at the fence when she arrived, and he stood when he saw her. and his face had the specific look of a man who wants to be told he's wrong about what he's looking at. There, he said, pointing at a section of the fence post nearest the ground. She crouched, looked, and felt the hair on her arms rise. It was a small mark, thin, deliberate, scratched into the post at ground level, where it wouldn't catch the eye unless you were specifically looking for it. A horizontal line with two short vertical marks beneath it. It meant nothing to most people. To Elena, it meant everything. It was a range mark, the kind of reference point a sniper team scratches at a calculated distance from a target position so they can confirm their firing solution without bringing equipment to the site. Someone had walked to this fence post, confirmed its distance from a predetermined firing position on the ridge, and marked it for future reference. Someone had pre-ranged the interior of this base. "What is it?" Ruiz said. She stood. Her voice was very level. "Get Vance, get Holloway, get them to the command building right now." "What is right now, Corporal?" He went. She stood at the fence for a moment looking at the mark, and then she looked up at the ridge. And somewhere up there, invisible in the rock and the shadows, Sorokov's people were doing the same thing she did every day. They were waiting for the moment. They had already chosen the moment. She turned and walked fast toward the command building. The briefing that followed was the briefing that changed everything. Vance listened with his hands flat on the table. Holloway stood against the wall with his arms no longer crossed. They were at his sides, and that small change in posture said more than anything he could have put into words. Davies was in the corner. Two other senior NCOs were present, neither of whom Elena had formally met. She laid the mark on the table. She'd photographed it with the basic camera from the observation post kit. She put the image down in front of Vance and said, "This is a sniper range reference. Someone on the outside of this wire has pre-measured firing distances to positions inside this base. They have a firing solution already built. When the attack starts, their shooters will not need to range anything. They will already know." The room was very quiet. One of the NCOs, she didn't know, a staff sergeant named Okafor, she would learn later, said, "How specific are we talking? Their rough estimate or bots?" "It's a marked reference point," she said. "That means within acceptable margin of error. They know the distance to this fence post from their firing position. And from this fence post, any trained shooter can calculate distance to every building on this base." Okafor looked at Vance. "Sir, that's accurate." "It's accurate," Holloway said. Everyone looked at him. He was looking at the photograph on the table. "I've seen range marks before," he said. "Different context, different country. But that's what that is." He paused. "She's right." The words cost him something. Elena could see it. Not much. Holloway was not a small enough man to make a big production of being wrong, but something. A small concession of pride in the service of the larger thing. She respected him for it immediately. Vance strayed in. "Options," he said. "We can request reinforcement." Okafor started. "Timeline," Vance said. "How long for reinforcement to arrive?" "Minimum 14 hours, realistically 20. "We don't have 20, Elena said. Every eye in the room came to her. "Based on the fence testing pattern and the rotation we observed overnight, they're in final preparation. They're not waiting for anything except their own readiness. When that readiness is confirmed," she paused. "It could be tonight. It could be tomorrow night. It is not going to be 3 nights from now." "You're telling me we defend with what we have," Vance said. "I'm telling you we defend with what we have, yes, sir, but..." She stopped for a moment, and this next part mattered, and she chose her words the way she chose her shots, carefully with full attention to where they would land. "Their advantage is the pre-range firing solution. If I can identify and neutralize the sniper positions before the assault kicks off, that advantage disappears. They lose precision, they lose the opening, and an assault that loses its opening loses its timing," Vance finished. "Yes." He looked at her for a long time. Then he looked around the room, at Holloway, who nodded once, at Okafor, who said nothing but tilted his head in the smallest possible acknowledgement, at Davies, who looked slightly terrified but was clearly trying not to show it. "All right," Vance said, "here's how we do this." He laid out the plan over the next 20 minutes. Reinforced positions at the north and east walls, heavy weapons on standby but not deployed in a way that would be visible from the ridge. Patrol patterns maintained unchanged, exactly as Elena had recommended, to preserve the illusion that the base was unaware. Communications checks every 30 minutes. and Elena on the observation post with full authorization to engage at her own discretion once the attack initiated. That last part made Holloway's jaw tighten. At her own discretion, he repeated. At her own discretion, Vance said. He looked at Holloway directly. You have something to add, Sergeant. Holloway was quiet for a moment, a long moment. No, sir, he said. Good. The room cleared. Elena was almost at the door when Vance said her name. She turned. I was alone in the room now. He looked older than he had that morning, which was what a certain kind of information does to a person. It ages you in the receiving of it. You're not telling me everything, he said. It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation. The tone of a man who had been reading people long enough to know the difference between someone who was being transparent and someone who was being selectively transparent. She looked at him. No, sir, she said, not yet. Is what you're not telling me operationally relevant? It's personally relevant, she said. Operationally, what I've given you is complete. The threat picture is accurate. The plan is sound. He studied her for a moment. And the personal part, she met his eyes. When this is over, she said, I'll tell you everything. He held her gaze for 3 seconds exactly. Then after, he said. After, she agreed. She walked out. The afternoon ground forward with the particular tension of time that knows it's running out. Elena spent it on the observation post mapping, watching, cataloging. The ridge gave up its secrets slowly and unwillingly, the way all serious threats do not all at once, but in increments, each one building on the last. By 1400, she had identified a 5th observation position. This one was better concealed than the others, tucked into a formation that would have been invisible without the thermal variance that emerged only in the specific light conditions of early afternoon. She added it to her mental map and kept moving. By 1530, she had the probable location of 2 sniper hides, not observation posts, but actual firing positions, set back from the ridge edge at distances and angles calculated to maximize coverage of the base, while minimizing the shooter's own exposure. Whoever had planned this had planned it well. She kept that thought in her mind. Whoever planned this. Because the precision of it, the patience of it, the particular way each element was positioned to support every other element, it had a signature. Not every commander fought the same way any more than every writer wrote the same way. There was a style to this, and the style was familiar. She had fought against this style before. 3 years ago, in a different country, when the plan had been even better than this one, and she hadn't seen it coming until it was far too late. She pushed that thought down. Hard. This was not the moment for it. At 1600, Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Webb found her at the observation post. She had heard his name from Vance during the briefing. Webb was the senior enlisted leader for the base's defensive element, the man who would be coordinating the wall positions if and when the assault came. He was 44, built close to the ground with a face that had the permanently weathered look of someone who had spent 2 decades in environments that were not kind to faces. He moved quietly for his size, and he came up the ladder to the observation post without announcement. He looked at the scope setup. He looked at the rifle. He didn't comment on either. Vance told me to sync with you, he said. Defensive positions, communications, timing. You and I need to know what the other is doing when this kicks off. Agreed, she said. Sit down. He sat, and for the next 40 minutes, they talked through every scenario she had identified, every firing position. She had mapped every decision point in the sequence of the likely assault. Webb asked precise questions. He didn't ask them quickly. He took his time with each one, turning it over before he committed to it, looking for the angles. Elena answered each question with the same precision. No more, no less than what he needed. By the end of it, Webb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You've been in a fight like this before. It wasn't quite a question. Similar elements, she said. What happened? She looked at the ridge. It went wrong. He nodded slowly as though that answer was somehow both unexpected and completely unsurprising. What was different then? She was quiet for a moment. I didn't know who was running it, she said, until it was too late. And now, she turned and looked at him directly. Now I know. Webb held her gaze for a moment. He was the kind of man who could hold a silence without filling it, which was a quality Elena had always found she could trust. People who rushed to fill silences were usually filling them with something other than truth. All right, he said, then we're ahead of where you were last time. Yes, she said, we are. He stood, looked at the ridge one more time. I'll have the wall positions ready by 1900. When you see something move up there, you tell me before you shoot. If you have the second, if you don't have the second, you shoot and tell me after. Understood. He started down the ladder, then stopped with his head still above the platform edge. He looked at the wrapped rifle, then at her. For what it's worth, he said, I've been in this business 22 years. I've seen shooters with $50,000 equipment miss things that mattered. I've seen shooters with 60-year-old iron hit things nobody believed were possible. He paused. It's not the rifle. She looked at him. Never has been, he said. He went down the ladder. Elena turned back to the scope. The ridge was going gold in the late afternoon light, the shadows beginning to stretch and deepen in the places she'd marked. She did a slow scan from left to right, checking each position in sequence, confirming cataloging. Everything was where she expected it to be, except one thing. On the high point of the ridge, the place where she'd seen the silhouette the night before, there was a figure again. Same position, same stance. But this time as the light shifted and the angle changed, she caught something she hadn't seen in darkness. He was looking directly at the observation post, not at the base generally, not at the perimeter, at the observation post, at her. The distance between them was just under a kilometer. At that distance, without optics, he couldn't possibly see her face. He couldn't see her eyes or her expression or the specific set of her shoulders. But the direction of his gaze was unmistakable, and in the cold certainty of that gaze, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt seen. Her hands on the rifle were perfectly still. And then slowly, deliberately, in a motion that was entirely too controlled to be anything other than intentional, the figure on the ridge raised one hand, not a wave, a point, directly at her. Elena's jaw set. He knew. She didn't know how, didn't know if someone had reported her arrival, didn't know if her own reconnaissance had been spotted, didn't know if it was simply Sorokov's intelligence network doing what it had always done, which was being 3 steps ahead of everyone who thought they were watching him. It didn't matter how. What mattered was this: the advantage of invisibility was gone. He knew she was there, which meant the timeline had just collapsed. Whatever window they'd had one day, maybe 2, had just closed down to hours. She reached for the radio. Vance, she said, go. He knows I'm here, she said. It's tonight. Tell Webb. A pause, then flat and calm. Understood. She put the radio down and looked at the ridge. The figure was gone. But she could feel the weight of what was coming, the way you feel a change in weather in your bones, in the specific quality of the air, in the way the world goes very still just before the thing arrives. That's going to change everything. She checked her ammunition, counted her rounds, confirmed the 0 one more time from memory. Then she settled in behind the scope and she waited, and she did not take her eyes off that ridge. Because somewhere up there, Sorokov was looking back at her. And both of them knew that this time there would be no unfinished business. This time someone was going to finish it. The night came down hard and fast, the way it always does at altitude, like a door being shut. By 1900, Webb had his wall positions set. Elena knew this not because he told her, but because she heard the quiet, precise movement of men taking their places. No shouting, no unnecessary radio traffic. The specific, disciplined silence of people who understood that noise was information given to the enemy for free. Webb had briefed his people well. By 2000, the base had gone through its normal evening routine with the mechanical faithfulness of men following instructions. They trusted even when they didn't fully understand them. Lights where lights normally were. Patrol at the normal time, the normal pace, the normal route. The performance of a base that didn't know it was being watched, executed by a base that knew exactly that. Elena had not left the observation post. She had been behind the scope for 11 hours with 2 breaks, 1 for water, 1 for a bathroom run that took 4 minutes and felt like 4 hours. Her back ached in the specific way that comes from holding one position for too long, a deep grinding complaint from the muscles along her spine that she had learned years ago to acknowledge and then set aside entirely, the way you set aside a conversation you don't have time for right now. The ridge was dark, active. She could feel the activity even when she couldn't see it. A quality of movement up there, a disturbance in a pattern of the darkness that was not wind and not animal. It was human. It was deliberate. They were moving into position. She had the radio. Webb. Go. Movement on the ridge. They're coming off the high ground, shifting toward the forward slope. How many can you confirm? Not yet. Give me 10 minutes. Copy. She went back to the scope, worked the grid from left to right slow, and controlled the way she always worked it, not rushing, not letting the urgency in her chest push her hands faster than her eyes could process. Speed and observation was how you miss things. And missing things right now was not an option. 2100, 14 minutes after her call to Webb, she found the first sniper. I was tucked behind a burned tree on the left shoulder of the ridge, maybe 940 meters out. She would not have found him at all if he hadn't shifted his weight. A single small adjustment, the kind a person makes when they've been still long enough that one leg starts to protest. The movement was less than 6 inches. Against the darkness of the ridge, it was nearly nothing. But nearly nothing was enough. She locked the position in her mind, held the crosshairs on the burned tree, checked wind light left to right manageable, checked her breathing, let one breath out slowly and did not bring another one in. She did not shoot. Not yet. Because one shot now, before she knew where the others were, would tell every other position on that ridge exactly where she was. And then she would lose the only thing she currently had that they didn't. She marked him and kept moving. 21-22. She found the second position. This one was better hidden, a rock formation on the right flank. Shooter lying prone in a gap between two boulders that from any other angle looked like solid rock. She found him the same way she'd found the first one, not by seeing him, but by seeing the one thing that gave him away. In this case, the faint optical signature of a scope catching a sliver of moonlight for less than a second as the clouds shifted. 1 second, she marked him. Kept moving. 21-45, third position. This one she almost missed entirely, and the fact that she almost missed it told her something important. This was the best shooter they had. The concealment was nearly perfect. The position offered full coverage of the base's eastern approach, with a natural rock overhang that would suppress the muzzle signature on the first shot. Whoever was in that hide had been trained by someone serious. She thought Sorokov trained them personally. She held the 3 positions in her mind, a triangle of fire that if activated simultaneously would cover every meaningful approach to the observation post, the command building in the eastern wall. It was a clean, efficient plan, the kind of plan that worked if nobody knew it was coming. She keyed the radio. Webb, I have 3 confirmed sniper positions. Do not engage. Wait for my signal. Understood. What's your signal? My first shot, she said. A pause. Copy that. 2200. It started with the power. The base's main generator went down without warning, not an explosion, not a dramatic failure, a clean cut, which meant it wasn't a malfunction. Someone had reached the generator, which meant the perimeter had already been penetrated. The base went dark. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Elena felt those 3 seconds the way you feel a held breath, taut, pressurized, everything compressed into the moment before release. Then every radio on the base crackled at once. Contact north fence movement outside the wire. Generators down, we need post 2 I have. And then from the ridge, the first shot, it hit the communications antenna on the command building. A precision strike, not random fire. A calculated hit designed to degrade the base's ability to coordinate its defense. Elena heard it and in the same instant registered 2 things simultaneously. The shot came from position 3, the best hidden one. The one she'd almost missed, which confirmed her assessment that the best shooter was there, and the angle of the strike meant the shooter had already adjusted for the antenna's exact position. Pre-ranged, just like she'd told them. The base erupted. Voices, movement, the controlled chaos of men responding to an attack they'd been told was coming, but that hits differently when it actually arrives. She heard Webb on the radio cutting through the noise with short, flat commands, north wall hold position, do not return fire until, and she heard Vance on a separate channel calling for emergency lighting, and underneath all of it, she heard from the eastern approach the sound of men moving. Not running, moving, controlled, fast, tactical. The assault was already inside the wire's approach corridor. Elena put her eye to the scope. Position 1, burned tree, 940 meters. The shooter there was moving, repositioning after the first shot from position 3, shifting to open his own angle on the base. He was good. He moved correctly, kept his profile low, used the terrain intelligently. But he moved. And when he moved, she had him. She didn't think about it. Thinking was for the preparation. The preparation was done. She shot. The rifle roared once in the dark of the observation post. The recoil came through her shoulder in the familiar controlled pulse of it. Not a shock, never a shock with a rifle, you know. Well, more like a handshake, something expected and absorbed. Downrange position 1 went still. Permanently, instantly, the ridge opened up. Position 2 fired, and the shot was close. Close enough that Elena heard it pass, and she was already moving, rolling left along the sandbag wall. Because a shooter who's been given one muzzle flash is a shooter who now has a target. She came up in a new position 3 feet from where she'd been and put her eye back to the scope. Position 2 was adjusting. He'd seen her muzzle flash. He was working his own adjustment, pulling his crosshairs to the new angle. She was faster. Second shot. Position 2 went down. 2, the base was in full contact now. She could hear it without looking the crack of small arms from the north wall. Webb's voice cutting through with coordinates, the sound of the emergency lighting finally kicking in and throwing hard shadows across the compound. Men were fighting. The perimeter was holding barely, but it was holding. In position 3, the best shooter, the one in the rock overhang, had gone quiet. That scared her more than the shooting. A shooter who stops firing is a shooter who is either dead relocating or waiting for something specific. She knew he wasn't dead. She hadn't touched him, which meant he was either moving or waiting. She swept the scope across the rock overhang. Nothing. She pushed further, right along the ridge. Nothing. She went back, left slower this time, fighting the urgency that was pulling her hands faster than they should go, forcing herself back to the systematic grid, back to the patience that had found the others when nothing else would have. 40 seconds, 50, a minute, and then she saw him. He'd relocated, moved laterally along the ridge to a new position, further right lower, which gave him a completely different angle on the compound. A new angle that covered something the original position hadn't covered. The observation post. He'd repositioned specifically to shoot her. The realization arrived at exactly the same moment she saw the muzzle flash. She dropped. The shot hit the sandbag wall where her head had been and threw dust and debris across the back of her neck. She was already on the floor of the observation post, flat cheek against the wood, breathing hard for the first time since the shooting started, not from fear but from the pure physiological shock of near miss, the body's involuntary response to the information that it almost wasn't here anymore. She gave herself 2 seconds. Just 2. Then she pushed back up. Not to the same position. To the far edge of the platform, the corner she'd have gone to if she were the shooter trying to predict where the target would reappear. She didn't go there. She went to the opposite corner low and brought the rifle up without fully extending her position, shooting from a compressed angle that gave her minimum exposure. She found him in the scope. He was good. He was already adjusting again, reading the observation post, predicting her. He was very fast. She was faster. Third shot. The rock overhang went still. 3 shots. 3 positions. Elena stayed flat for a moment, sweeping the scope across the full ridge, checking, confirming, looking for a 4th position. She might have missed a 5th, anything, still moving with intent. The ridge was dark. The movement she'd been tracking all night had stopped, not the small, chaotic movement of men in retreat, but the specific weighted stillness of a coordinated plan that has lost its shooters. Without the sniper cover, the assault force had lost its precision layer. Below her, the fighting at the perimeter was still going. She could hear it, the crack and return of small arms. Webb's voice steady and controlled, Holloway's voice from somewhere near the north wall. But the character of it had changed. The assault had been moving with direction, with coordinated purpose. Now it was moving differently, faster in some places, stalled in others, the coherence breaking down. She keyed the radio. Webb, all 3 sniper positions are down. Their cover is gone. A pause, 2 seconds, 3, and then Webb's voice came back, and even through the compression of the radio, she could hear what was underneath it. Say again. All 3 sniper hides are neutralized. You have a window. Push them back. Another pause. Shorter. Copy, Webb said. And then to his people, all posts push forward, now move. She kept the scope on the ridge. And that was when she heard it. Not over the radio, not from below. From somewhere in the base itself, a sound that should not have been there, coming from the wrong direction entirely. Not the perimeter, not the eastern approach. Interior. Someone was already inside the wire. Vance, she called on the radio, check your interior. You have at least one inside the perimeter right now. Static. Then Vance's voice, and it was tight in a way she hadn't heard from him yet. We have a contact near the command building. One, possibly two, a shot from inside the base. Close. Then Vance's radio went dead. Elena was off the observation post and moving before the echo of that shot finished bouncing off the compound walls. She came down the ladder at a speed that was not entirely safe, and she didn't care hit the ground and moved toward the command building in a low, fast run keepings to the shadows that the emergency lighting created. Light was safety for the people defending and a targeting system for the people inside who shouldn't be there. She used the shadows between light sources, moved in bursts, stopped at each corner long enough to listen and look before committing. 20 meters from the command building. She heard voices, two of them, neither in English. She stopped at the corner of the adjacent structure. Two men, both armed, one covering the command building entrance, one moving toward the side wall where the emergency communications backup was housed. They weren't here randomly. They knew the base layout. They were targeting specific infrastructure. This wasn't opportunistic infiltration. This was planned. Saboteurs, pre-positioned, waiting for the main assault to draw attention to the perimeter before activating. She processed this in less than a second. The man moving toward the communications backup was the priority. If he reached it, the base lost its ability to call for support entirely. She moved. The first man went down before the second one knew she was there. She was on the second before he could fully react. Not a shot, too much noise, too much risk of a wild round near the command building. A hard, fast physical takedown, the kind that ends in about 4 seconds, when one person knows exactly what they're doing and the other doesn't. He didn't know what he was doing. It ended in 4 seconds. She cuffed both men with the zip ties from her vest, checked them for secondaries, and then pushed into the command building. Vance was at the far wall, one hand pressed to his left arm, the radio on the floor beside him. He was standing, which was the first thing she checked. Standing and alert, which was the second. How bad, she said. Graze, he said. I'm fine. What's outside? 2 down, she said. Secured. Saboteurs. They were going for the backup communications. Vance looked at his arm, then at her. You came off the observation post. You went off radio, she said. What would you have done? He looked at her for a moment. Then almost imperceptibly, he nodded. She picked up the radio from the floor and handed it to him. He keyed it. Webb. Status. Webb's voice came back immediate, and the quality of it had changed completely from 10 minutes ago. Oh, the tightness was gone. What was in its place was something that sounded like controlled, hard-earned momentum. They're breaking, Webb said. Assault force is pulling back to the eastern approach. We've got them on the back foot, sir. They're running. Vance closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Elena watched him do it. Watched the 1 second of something that wasn't quite relief, but was adjacent to it. The specific emotion of a person who has held a very heavy thing for a very long time and has just been told they don't have to drop it yet, that they can set it down carefully, that the crisis is not over, but the worst of it has passed. Then he opened his eyes and he was the commander again. Do not pursue past the wire, he said into the radio. Hold the perimeter. Account for all personnel. I want a full sweep of the interior. We may have more inside. Copy? He lowered the radio, looked at Elena. His arm was still bleeding, slow and steady through his fingers. You need that looked at, she said. In a minute, he said. The ridge. 3 sniper positions neutralized, she said. The assault force has lost its precision cover and is retreating. The saboteur element is contained. She paused. Sorokov will regroup. Vance looked at her. You keep using that name. She went still. She hadn't realized she'd said it out loud. Not like that, not the direct, unguarded use of it, the way you say a name that lives so deeply in your mind that it escapes before you can catch it. Walker, Vance said quietly. Who is Sorokov? She looked at him. Outside, the sound of the firefight was dying, sporadic shots fading, the assault force completing its retreat. Webb's voice was moving through the radio in short professional bursts, accounting for his people securing the perimeter. The base was holding. The immediate crisis was over, which meant there was nothing left to hide behind. She looked at Vance, and he looked back at her with the patient, direct gaze of a man who had just watched her do things that couldn't be explained by standard training, by standard assignment, by any standard anything. He had earned the question. He had earned the answer. She lowered the rifle. Sorokov, she said, is the reason I'm here. Not the assignment, not the mission order. She stopped, started again. 3 years ago, I was part of a classified unit, 6 people. We had a mission that went wrong in a way that doesn't happen by accident. 5 of my people died. She held his gaze. The man who runs that operation on the ridge is the man who made that happen. His name is Colonel Dmitry Sorokov. Vance was very still. And I've been looking for him, she said, for 3 years. The radio crackled, Webb's voice flat and urgent. Sir, we found something at the north perimeter. You need to see this. Vance looked at the radio, looked at Elena. This conversation, he said, is not finished. No, she agreed. It isn't. He keyed the radio. En route, he said, and he moved toward the door, and Elena followed him, and outside the base was wounded but standing emergency lights across the compound. Men at the walls, the sound of boots and radio calls, in the particular organized chaos of a defense that had held when it easily could have broken. The Marines who had laughed at her rifle were at those walls. They weren't laughing. Several of them looked at her as she moved through the compound with Vance. Not with the easy dismissal of yesterday morning. Not with the amusement of men who think they know exactly what they're looking at. They looked at her the way people look at something they have fundamentally misjudged and are only now beginning to understand. She didn't need them to say anything. She didn't need anything from them at all. What she needed was at the north perimeter, where Webb was standing over something he'd found at the base of the fence, something that hadn't been there before the attack. A message, not written in English. She crouched over it, read it, and felt the temperature in her chest drop by several degrees. Because the message was not for Vance. It was not for the base. It was for her. 6 words written in a hand she did not recognize, but in a language she knew because she had spent 3 years learning everything about the man who used it. 6 words that said, I know what you survived, Elena. And below that one more word, a name, not her name, the name of the unit she'd told no one about. The classified unit that was supposed to have never existed. The name Iron Lynx. She stood up slowly. The cold that had started in her chest had spread outward into her hands and to the back of her jaw. Not fear, something older than fear. The specific feeling of a secret that has been carried alone for 3 years suddenly being visible, suddenly being held by someone else, someone who should not have it, someone who had it specifically because they were the reason it had to be a secret in the first place. Sorokov knew. He had always known she was here. The pointed finger on the ridge hadn't been a guess. It hadn't been intelligence. It had been recognition. Personal recognition. The acknowledgement of someone who knew exactly who she was, exactly what she carried, and had wanted her to know that he knew. She stood at the north fence in the dying light of the emergency floods, and she felt for the first time since she'd stepped off that supply truck, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel yet. She felt the weight of 3 years, all of it, at once. Webb was beside her. She hadn't heard him move closer. You okay, he said. She looked at the message for one more second. Then she straightened, set her shoulders, looked at the ridge. No, she said honestly, and then quieter, but I will be. Webb didn't push her. That was the thing about him. He had the rare quality of knowing when a person needed a minute and when they needed someone to leave them entirely alone. And he understood that right now Elena needed something in between. Close enough that she wasn't standing at that fence by herself with a 3-year-old ghost in a 6-word message. Far enough that she could breathe. He stood about 4 feet away and looked at the ridge and said nothing. Vance was the one who moved first. He crouched over the message, read it twice, then stood and looked at Elena with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not the professional assessment he'd been giving her since she arrived. Something more direct than that. Something that was trying to understand the full dimension of what was standing in front of him. Iron Lynx, he said. She looked at him. That's the name on the message, he said. And I can tell from your face that it's not a name you expected anyone else to know. It's classified, she said. Beyond classified. It's buried. Buried by who? She held his gaze. That, she said, is the question I've spent 3 years trying to answer. Vance straightened. He looked at Webb, then back at Elena. He made a decision. She could see it happen that specific moment when a person moves from gathering information to acting on it. He jerked his head toward the command building. Inside, he said, both of you, now. They moved through the compound in the aftermath of the assault past the men repairing the fence breach at Section 7, past the medic working on a lance corporal with a shoulder wound near the eastern wall past Holloway, who was standing at the north post with a radio in one hand and a look on his face that was so far from the man who'd mocked her rifle yesterday morning that he might have been a different person entirely. He caught her eye as she passed, said nothing. But the look said enough. They got inside. Vance closed the door. 0100 hours. Start from the beginning, Vance said. He sat at the table arm bandaged. Now someone had gotten to it while she was at the fence, and he folded his hands in front of him with the deliberate patience of a man who intended to hear everything. Not the mission order that brought you here. Before that, iron links, what was it? Elena stood at the far side of the table. She didn't sit. Standing was easier for this. She'd found that over 3 years of carrying it, the weight of it was easier to hold when she was upright. Like the posture itself was part of the armor. Iron Links was a classified special operations unit, she said. 6 people. We operated outside normal chain of command reporting through a single intelligence liaison, nobody else. The unit existed on paper in exactly one place, and that place wasn't accessible to anyone below the level of... She stopped. Recalibrated. It was deeply buried, intentionally, the kind of unit that officially doesn't exist. What was the mission scope, Webb asked. Targeted intelligence collection, high-value surveillance, occasionally direct action when no other asset could get close enough. She paused. We were good at getting close to things that didn't want to be close to. Vance nodded slowly. And 3 years ago. 3 years ago, we had a mission in country. She said in country without specifying which country, and Vance didn't ask, which told her he understood the kind of classified that doesn't get specified even in private. The target was a network, not a person, a communications network used to move money and weapons through the region. We were supposed to locate the node photograph, it confirmed the structure, and pull back. Clean, no contact. She stopped. The room was very quiet. It wasn't clean, she said. Webb leaned forward slightly. What happened? We hit an ambush, she said. Not a patrol that got lucky, a prepared ambush. 3 layers pre-positioned waiting specifically for us at the specific route we'd chosen for exfil. A route we'd decided on 12 hours earlier and shared through encrypted comms with exactly one person. She looked at Vance. Our liaison. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Someone burned you, Vance said. Someone burned us, she agreed, and they burned us completely. The ambush knew our route, our timeline, our team composition. They knew our call signs. They knew the frequencies we'd shift to under contact. She stopped for one breath. 5 people died in that ambush. 2 in the initial contact, 3 in the follow-on pursuit. I survived because I was the farthest back in the formation when it initiated, and because the man running the ambush... She stopped again. Because Sorokov had a reason to let me run. Webb's head came up. He let you go. He could have closed the net. He had enough people. But he pulled back at the moment he could have ended it. She looked at her hands on the table. I didn't understand it at the time. I thought it was a mistake on his part. A miscalculation. I spent the first year thinking I'd survived because of something I did. But it wasn't a mistake, Vance said. No, she said. It wasn't. He let me go so I would report back. So I would be the witness. So I would carry the story, the false story, the story that made it look like a random ambush, a mission that went wrong by bad luck. If I was dead, they'd have to write their own report, and that report might not hold up. But if I was alive and traumatized and reporting what I'd seen, she paused. A survivor's account is harder to question than an official report. Vance was very still. He used your survival as cover. Yes, and the 5 who died. Buried under a false incident report, she said. Classified, sealed, marked as a training accident in a non-combat theater. Their families were told something that had nothing to do with how they actually died. The silence after that was different from the silences before it. It had weight and texture, the specific heaviness of information that has just made the world a slightly worse place to be in. Webb stood up from the table. He didn't go anywhere. He just stood because sitting down with that information felt wrong. And the liaison, Vance said, the one person who knew the route. I spent 18 months trying to confirm it, she said. I had a name by month 6, proof by month 14. By month 18, I had enough to bring to... She stopped. I tried to bring it to the right people. The people who should have cared about 5 dead American special operators and a conspiracy that went through our own intelligence chain. She looked at Vance directly. The file disappeared. The people I talked to stopped returning calls. One of them transferred overseas within a week of our conversation. Oh, Vance said quietly. How high does it go? I don't know the ceiling, she said. I know the floor, and the floor is high enough that a classified unit can be murdered buried and have its name erased, and the people responsible face no consequence for 3 years. Vance rubbed one hand over his face, the gesture of a man absorbing something that is too large to absorb quickly. He looked at Webb. Webb looked back at him with an expression that said, I don't have anything useful to say, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Sorokov, Vance said. What's his role in all of this? He's not an intelligence liaison. He's a military commander. I was the executor, she said. The liaison identified us, gave him the route, the timeline, the frequencies. Sorokov ran the ambush. He was the weapon. The person who hired him, who used him, that's the part I'm still working on. She paused. But Sorokov knows who that person is. He has to. You don't run an operation that clean without full information from the client. Vance leaned back in his chair. He was thinking she could see it, the systematic working through of implications. He was a methodical man, and right now methodical was exactly what the situation needed. That's why you didn't just shoot him, Webb said suddenly. She looked at him. From the ridge, he said, you had him in the scope last night. You were close enough, but you didn't shoot. No, she said, because if he's dead, whatever he knows dies with him. Yes. Webb nodded slowly. There was something in his expression that wasn't quite admiration. It was more complicated than that. The look of someone who has just understood the full cost of a choice that looks simple from the outside. You need him alive, Vance said. I need him alive and talking, she said. And I need whatever he says documented in a way that can't be buried. Not a classified report, not an internal file, something that exists outside the system that's been protecting the people responsible. Vance looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, and you thought coming here to this base, to this specific posting, I didn't come here by accident, she said. The assignment was real. There was a legitimate request for a precision shooter at Raven Ridge, and I qualified and I pushed hard for the posting. But I knew Sorokov was operating in this sector. I knew he was working something in these mountains. I thought if I could get close enough to his operational area, you could draw him out, Vance said. Or find him, she said. I didn't expect him to come to me. Vance was quiet. Then he came to you. He knows I've been looking for him, she said. That message at the fence, he didn't write that for intelligence value. He wrote it because he wanted me to know that he knows. That he's not afraid of me. She paused. That this is personal for him too. The radio on the table crackled. Holloway's voice tight and controlled. Command, this is Holloway. We have a transmission coming in on the secondary emergency frequency. It's not one of ours. A beat. Someone's talking on our channel who shouldn't be. Vance grabbed the radio. Patch it through. Static and then a voice. Elena knew it before the first word finished forming. She had heard it 3 years ago in the mountains of a different country. Giving orders in the dark, and the sound of it had been the last thing her teammates heard before everything went wrong. It was a voice with weight to it, not loud, not theatrical. The voice of a man who had never needed volume to make people afraid. Sorokov said in English that was accented but precise. Colonel Vance, I want to speak with the woman. Vance looked at Elena. She held out her hand for the radio. He hesitated 1 second, 2, and then he gave it to her. She keyed it. I'm here, she said, a pause on the other end, brief. Then you shot 3 of my best people tonight, Elena. She said nothing. Kozlov at the burned tree, Petrov on the right flank, and Marchenko in the overhang. He was the finest marksman I have trained in 20 years. Another pause. I want you to know that I am not angry. I am impressed. There is a difference. What do you want, Sorokov? I want to finish this, he said. Not tonight. Tonight was a demonstration. I wanted you to understand what I have available to me. I wanted your commander to understand. A beat. Tomorrow night I bring twice the force. I have a support element that did not arrive for this engagement. When it arrives, this base does not survive a second assault. Colonel Vance knows this. She looked at Vance. His jaw was set. Say what you're offering, she said. I'm offering a trade, Sorokov said. You come out of that base. Come to the ridge. We finish what we started 3 years ago, just the 2 of us. And when it's done, I pull my people back. The base stands. The room was completely silent. Or Sorokov continued, you stay inside your wire, and tomorrow night I take the base apart piece by piece, and you survive long enough to watch every person in there die before I find you at the end of it. A pause. I've done it before. You know I have. She knew he had. She had carried the weight of knowing that for 3 years. Vance was shaking his head, small controlled shakes. The head movement of a man who is not going to agree to something and wants that fact visible without making it loud. She keyed the radio. I'll give you my answer at dawn, she said, on this frequency. Dawn, Sorokov confirmed, and the channel went dead. She set the radio on the table. Vance said immediately, no. I know, she said. Whatever you're thinking, I'm not going to the ridge alone, she said. I know that, but I need him to think I'm considering it. Because if he thinks I'm considering it, he waits for my answer instead of moving up his timeline. Webb exhaled. You're buying time. I'm buying until dawn, as she said. 6 hours, long enough for a resupply bird to... Resupply bird won't make it in under 8, Vance said. Even if I called it right now, then long enough to figure out something else, she said. But not if he rolls his timeline forward tonight. Vance looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up. You could have led with that, he said, the stall. I could have, she agreed, but then you wouldn't have let me answer him. He gave her a look that was caught exactly between frustration and respect. It was, she thought, a fair reaction. Holloway, Vance said into the radio. Sir, full defensive stand to. Nobody sleeps. I want eyes on every approach. Already done, sir, Holloway said. And there was something in his voice, a quality that hadn't been there 2 days ago. A flatness that was not absence of feeling, but was feeling compressed into pure function. He had converted somewhere in the last few hours from a man who dismissed her to a man who was operating on the same team as her. It had taken a firefight and 3 dead enemy snipers to get there, but it had happened. Conversions like that, Elena had learned, tended to stick. Webb, as she said, he looked at her. Walk me through everything you know about the eastern approach from the base of the ridge to the high point. He pulled his chair around to her side of the table without asking why. He knew why. She could see it on his face. He'd already started thinking the same direction she had, which was not toward waiting for dawn and making a decision then, but toward the only option that made any real sense. Not waiting for Sorokov to bring the fight down, taking the fight up to him. They worked through it for 90 minutes. Webb knew the terrain from previous patrol routes, not recent ones. The patrols didn't go that high anymore, but from the first months of the posting, when the threat assessment had required it. He had the memory for it, the kind of spatial recall that comes from actually moving through terrain rather than looking at maps of it. He drew it on paper, corrected himself, twice confirmed the corrections from memory. And by the time they were done, Elena had a route. Not a safe route. There was no safe route, but a viable one. At 0230, Holloway knocked on the command building door and came in without waiting for an answer. He looked at the paper on the table, looked at Elena, looked at Vance. I want in, he said. Vance looked at him. In on what? Whatever she's planning, Holloway said. He didn't look at Elena when he said it. He looked at Vance because he was addressing the chain of command, but then he shifted his eyes to her because she was the person whose answer actually mattered. I know the north approach better than Webb does. I've run it in the dark twice. Elena looked at him for a moment. She thought about the man who tapped her rifle with 2 fingers and said, it works, like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all week. She thought about the compression marks in the fence line and the way his face had changed when he saw them. She thought about his voice on the radio an hour ago, steady and operational, no trace of the easy dismissal left in it. Why, she said. He met her eyes. Because 5 people died and got buried under a lie, he said. And I've been in this uniform long enough that means something to me. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she moved the paper so he could see it. He leaned over the table and studied the route without speaking. Then he straightened. You'll want to come in from the left shoulder, not the right. The right approach has a choke point about 2/3 up that you won't see until you're in it. She made a mark on the paper. How wide is the choke? Wide enough for 1 person sideways, he said. If they have anyone watching that angle. We go left, she said. We go left, he agreed. It was, she thought, the first time they had agreed on anything. At 0300, Vance called her to the side of the room. He spoke quietly enough that Webb and Holloway couldn't hear him, though she suspected Webb could hear most of it anyway. The people who buried Iron Links, he said, when Sorokov is captured, when whatever he knows is documented, what happens to it? She looked at him. That depends on who gets it. What if it went through me, he said, not through standard channels, directly from this base to someone outside the system you're describing? She studied his face. You have someone. I have someone I trust, he said. Completely. Someone with enough standing that a documented testimony from an enemy commander about a conspiracy inside American intelligence. He stopped. It would not disappear. She thought about the file that had disappeared, the phone calls that stopped being returned, the officer who transferred overseas within a week. She thought about what it would mean to finally have something that couldn't be buried. After we bring him down, she said. After he agreed, she nodded once. It was enough. At 0345, Webb touched her arm as she was checking her kit. Elena, he said. He used her first name without preamble, the way people do when the formality of rank has burned off in the heat of a shared bad night. I need to ask you something. She looked at him. 3 years ago, he said, when the ambush happened, when it went wrong, he paused, choosing his words. You said Sorokov could have closed the net, could have finished it, but he let you run. Yes. Did you ever consider, Webb said slowly, that he let you run specifically so you'd come looking for him, that all of this, you tracking him for 3 years ending up here, that it was something he wanted? The question hit her like a cold current. She had asked herself a version of it before. In the long nights of the first year when she was still raw enough, that sleep came in short, interrupted pieces and her mind ran the ambush over and over, looking for the things she could have done differently. She had wondered in those nights whether her survival had been an accident or a gift she didn't want. But this was a different version of the question. Not did he let you live, but did he engineer what you've become? Did he build the last 3 years of your life the way he built the ambush? Did he create the hunter so that one day the hunter would come to him? She looked at Webb. Yes, she said, I've considered it. And she was quiet for a moment. If he wanted me here, she said, then he's been waiting for this, which means he thinks he knows how it ends. Does that change what you're doing? She picked up her rifle, settled it on her shoulder. It means I have to make sure he's wrong about the ending, she said. She walked out into the dark. Behind her, she heard Webb say quietly to no one in particular, Lord. And then she heard his boots on the ground behind her and Holloway's behind his, and the three of them moved into the dark toward the base of the ridge, where Sorokov was waiting, certain in his calculations, certain in his plan, certain in the way that men who have never truly been beaten remain certain right up until the moment they aren't. The wind off the mountain was cold and sharp. Elena moved through it without flinching. She had been cold before. She had been afraid before. She had stood at the edge of something that could kill her and taken one more step forward anyway because of the alternative, stopping, turning back. Letting the dead stay buried and the lie stay standing was not something she could live with. She had learned that about herself 3 years ago, standing over 5 bodies in a country she couldn't name. The ridge rose ahead of her in the dark. She moved toward it. They moved in silence, the three of them up the left shoulder of the ridge, the way Holloway had said, staying low, staying slow, using the dark, the way you use any resource in short supply carefully without waste. Elena led, Holloway behind her left shoulder, Webb behind her right. The formation had established itself without discussion, the natural geometry of 3 people who understand their own roles and don't need to negotiate them. Elena had the rifle. She had the target knowledge. She led. Holloway had the route. He'd run this approach in the dark twice before, and twice before was 2 more times than anyone else present. When the ground changed under her feet in ways she couldn't read fast enough, she felt his hand on her shoulder. A brief directional pressure left her write no words, and she moved accordingly. Webb had the rear. He was the one who would know first if something came up from behind them, and he was the one Elena trusted most to handle it quietly if it did. 0400. The base was below them now, visible in the pattern of its emergency lighting, a grid of light and shadow that from up here looked smaller than it felt from inside it. She could see the wall positions, the patrol movement, the steady red pulse of the backup communications antenna that had survived the attack. It looked from up here like something fragile, like something that a hard enough wind could dismantle. She turned away from it and kept climbing. The first contact came at 0422, two-thirds up the ridge. Not an ambush. A single sentry positioned exactly where Holloway had said a sentry would be, positioned on a flat rock shelf that commanded the approach from both directions. Holloway had warned her about him before they started climbing. She had a solution ready before they reached the shelf. She didn't need the rifle for this one. 30 seconds of silence, then Webb's hand on her shoulder. Clear. They kept moving. 0440. The high point of the ridge was close enough now that she could hear voices low sporadic. The sound of men waiting in the dark, who have been waiting long enough that the waiting itself has become routine. She counted voices. 3 distinct, possibly a 4th further along the rock line. Sorokov's immediate security element. She stopped, held up a fist. Both men behind her went still. She turned to Holloway, held up 3 fingers pointed at the voice directions. He nodded. She pointed at Webb, then at the furthest voice position, then at herself and Holloway at the nearer 2. Webb nodded once, slow and certain, the nod of a man who has done difficult things in the dark before and is prepared to do them again. They split. What happened in the next 4 minutes? Elena would later be unable to recount in precise sequence because that was the nature of close action. It compressed time and detail into a blur that only resolved into distinct moments afterward, when the body's chemistry settled and the mind could sort through what it had recorded. What she knew clearly and permanently was the outcome. The security element went down without a shot fired. Without a shot fired, which meant without a sound that would carry to wherever Sorokov was, which meant the element of surprise was still intact, which was the only thing that made what came next possible. 0457. Webb materialized at her shoulder from the darkness. He held up 4 fingers, then closed his fist. She nodded. All 4. Holloway was already moving ahead, reading the high ground, finding the line of approach to the position at the very top of the ridge where Sorokov would be. Because Sorokov would be at the top. She knew that without needing to confirm it. He was the kind of man who commanded from the highest point available, not from arrogance, but from the tactical preference of someone who has learned to read a battlefield from elevation and does not trust any picture he can't see for himself. I would be at the top. He would be looking down at the base. He would be waiting for dawn and her answer on the radio. He would not be expecting her behind him. She moved past Holloway and covered the last 40 meters alone. She found him exactly where she knew he would be. His back was partially to her, not fully. Not the clean, unguarded back of a man who feels entirely safe, but the 3/4 profile of a man who keeps some attention behind him even when he believes his security is solid. He was looking at the base, at the lights, at the thing he intended to take apart in a few hours' time. He was alone at the high point, 2 meters of open rock between him and the nearest cover. Elena raised the rifle, and Sorokov said without turning, "I wondered how long it would take you." She went completely still. He turned slowly. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe memory had compressed him, made him smaller than he was, the psychological defense of a person who needs their threat to be manageable. He was not manageable looking. He was a large, calm, self-contained man who looked at the rifle aimed at his chest with the equanimity of someone who had looked at weapons aimed at him before and had decided at some point that fear of death was a luxury he couldn't afford. It was, she thought, with a cold spike of recognition, the same decision she had made. "Elena Walker," he said. Her full name said the way you say the name of someone you've thought about for a long time. "You climbed faster than I expected. Gave you until 0515. "Put your hands where I can see them," she said. He raised both hands, slowly, without drama. "Of course," he said. "You've earned this moment. I won't take it from you. Get on your knees." He lowered himself to one knee, then the other. The movement was unhurried, almost graceful, the movement of a man who is complying because he has chosen to not, because he's been forced to. And that distinction, that precise, deliberate distinction, told her something important. He had wanted this. Webb had asked her 3 hours ago whether Sorokov had engineered the last 3 years, whether he had built the hunter and then waited for the hunter to come to him. She had said she'd considered it. She had said she needed to make sure he was wrong about the ending. Now she was here, rifle up, Sorokov on his knees in front of her, and the ending was hers to write. "You're going to ask me why I let you survive," Sorokov said. "I already know why," she said. He tilted his head slightly. A fraction of surprise. Do you? You needed a witness, she said. A live, credible, traumatized witness to an incident that was going to be reported as a random ambush. A survivor's account closes questions. It's harder to challenge than a report written by people with a reason to lie. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "You're right. That was the original reason." He paused. "But it wasn't the only one." She said nothing. Let him continue. "You were the best one," he said, "of your unit. I had comprehensive intelligence on all 6 of you, skill profiles, psychological assessments, operational history, and you were the best one by a meaningful margin." He held her gaze. "Killing the best one would have been a waste. I don't waste things that have value." The cold that moved through her at those words was not fear. It was fury, a clean, white-hot fury of the specific kind that comes from being used from having your survival weaponized by the person who caused the thing you survived. "You kept me alive," she said, "so you could use my survival. I kept you alive because I believed you would eventually become more useful alive than dead," he said. "I was correct. Here you are. You found me. You found things that 3 years of official silence could not bury. You're going to make a problem for people who thought they were untouchable." He paused. "None of that happens if you're dead in that mountain 3 years ago." "My team," she said. The words came out steady. She was proud of how steady they came out. Marcus Webb, Sarah Cho, David Reyes, James Park, Anna Kowalczyk. She watched his face. "Say their names." Something shifted in his expression. Not remorse, she didn't believe he was capable of remorse exactly, but something that recognized weight, that acknowledged the names as more than data. "Marcus Webb," he said. "Sarah Cho, David Reyes, James Park, Anna Kowalczyk. They were soldiers," she said. "They were professionals. They deserved to die as what they were not, to be buried under a lie about a training accident." "Yep," he said. "They did." The agreement surprised her. She hadn't expected agreement. "Then tell me who gave you the route," she said. "The timeline, the frequencies, the name of the liaison who burned them." Sorokov was quiet for a moment. The wind moved across the high point of the ridge, cold and indifferent. Below them, the base lights held steady against the dark. "If I give you that name," he said, "I am a dead man, not from you, from the people who employed me. They have reach." "You're a prisoner," she said. "You'll be protected." "No one is protected from these people," he said. "Not in a cell, not in witness protocol, not anywhere the system they operate within can reach." He looked at her steadily. "You know this. You tried to report it. You know what they can do." She did know. The disappeared file, the unanswered calls, the officer who was gone within a week. "Then what do you want?" she said, "in exchange?" "I want what you want," he said. "I want it to be real. I want the name to reach someone who is outside the system that protects them. Someone who cannot be transferred, cannot be pressured, cannot be bought." He paused. "Your commander has someone like that." "I know he does, because I know Nathan Vance's history, and I know who he's trusted over 20 years of service." The shock moved through her fast and cold. "You know about Vance's contact," she said. "I know many things," Sorokov said. "That's why I'm still alive. That's why I chose this location for this operation. Not because it was the optimal military target." He held her eyes. "Because you would be sent here, and Vance would be here. And the 3 pieces you, Vance, and his contact would be in the same place at the same time for the first time. The ridge, the timing, the attack, the message at the fence, all of it reorganized itself in Elena's mind into a different shape. Not Sorokov's plan to destroy the base, not his plan to settle old scores with her, his plan to be captured. By her, specifically by her, because she was the only person he trusted to take him to Vance, and Vance was the only person he trusted to reach the contact, and the contact was the only person who could actually do anything with what Sorokov knew. Webb had been right. He had engineered all of it. But the ending he'd engineered was not what she'd assumed. "You've been trying to give yourself up," she said slowly, "this entire time." "I've been trying to give myself up to the right person," he said. "In the right way, with enough evidence that what I say cannot be dismissed." He paused. "The attack tonight was real. My people believed it was real. But the objective was never the base." He looked at her. "The objective was this conversation." She stared at him. "You used your own men," she said. 3 of them are dead." "Yes," he said. The word came out flat and unadorned, And for the first time, she heard something underneath his composure that was not quite guilt, but was its neighbor. They knew the risks. They did not know the full plan. A pause. Pause. That is a debt I carry. It's not the only one, she said. No, and he agreed. It is not. She held the rifle steady and looked at him across the 2 meters of open rock and thought about 3 years, about 5 graves, about a file that disappeared and a phone that stopped being answered, and the weight of carrying a truth that nobody with power wanted to hear. She thought about what it would mean to pull the trigger right now. The satisfaction of it, immediate, total the end of the thing that had been chasing her for 3 years, finally caught and finished. She thought about how much she had wanted that. How many nights that wanting had been the only thing keeping her moving forward. And she thought about 5 names: Marcus Webb, Sarah Cho, David Reyes, James Park, Anna Kowalczyk. They didn't need her revenge. They needed their names back. They needed the lie that buried them, pulled up by the roots and burned. They needed the people who had decided their lives were worth less than a secret to face what they had decided. None of that happened if Sorokov died on this ridge. All of it could happen if he didn't. She lowered the rifle. Not all the way. She kept it in her hands, kept her finger indexed, kept her eyes on him. But she lowered it. Get up, she said. He rose, slowly as before, watching her face. Webb, she called. He came out of the dark immediately, which meant he'd been close enough to hear most of it. She didn't mind. She preferred it. He's coming down with us, she said. Webb looked at Sorokov. Sorokov looked back at Webb with the calm, assessing gaze of a man taking a measurement. Webb said nothing. He moved behind Sorokov and zip-tied his wrist with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this before and intends to do it correctly. Sorokov made no resistance. Holloway appeared from the right. He looked at Sorokov, then at Elena, then at the rifle in her hands, and his expression moved through several things quickly. Surprise, assessment, something that landed close to respect. We good, he said. We're good, she said. Let's go down. They came off the ridge as the sky ahead of them began to move from black toward the deep, uncertain gray that comes before first light. The 4 of them, Elena leading Sorokov behind her, Webb and Holloway behind him, descended in the same careful silence they'd used going up. The base below them held its light steady. The radio on Elena's vest stayed quiet. Webb had keyed Vance a single-word transmission before they started the descent. The word was coming. Vance was at the gate when they came through the wire. He looked at Sorokov. He looked at Elena. He looked at the rifle in her hands. He said nothing for a moment. Then secure him in the command building. 2 people on him at all times. He looked at Webb. Webb nodded and moved Sorokov forward. Then Vance turned to Elena and the 2 of them stood at the gate for a moment in the gray pre-dawn light, and he said quietly, "You could have shot him." "Yes," she said, "but you didn't." "No." He studied her face. "Why?" She looked at the command building where Webb and Holloway were taking Sorokov. "Because 5 people deserve better than a body on a ridge that gets classified and forgotten," she said. "They deserve a name. They deserve the truth on record. They deserve for the people who decided they were expendable to have to stand in front of that decision and own it." Vance was quiet. "You said you have someone," she said, "outside the system." "I do." "Then let's do this right," she said. "Let's do it so it can't be undone." He nodded once and he walked toward the command building, and she walked beside him, and behind them the sky continued its slow move toward light. The debrief took 4 hours. 4 hours in the command building with Sorokov talking and Vance recording and Elena sitting across the table, asking the questions that 3 years of living with the answers had taught her to ask. Sorokov talked without coercion, without negotiation, without the evasions of a man trying to protect himself. He talked like a man who had decided that the weight of what he knew was too heavy to keep carrying and had chosen finally to set it down. He gave them the liaison's name at the 50-minute mark. Elena had suspected it. She had not been certain. Hearing it confirmed, hearing it spoken aloud in a room with witnesses and a recording produced an emotion she didn't have a clean word for. Not relief, not satisfaction. Something that felt like the specific physical sensation of a bone that has been fractured and misaligned for 3 years being set back into its correct position. It hurt. And it was right. I gave them the financial connection at the 2-hour mark. The mechanism by which money had moved from people in comfortable offices to Sorokov's operation. Specific accounts, specific dates, Specific amounts that corresponded to specific events that Elena could corroborate because she had lived through them. I gave them the documentation at the 3-hour mark. Photographs and records he had carried not on him, but in a location he now disclosed as his own insurance policy. The kind of insurance a man takes out when he works for people who have a history of eliminating liabilities. At the 4-hour mark, he stopped. He looked at Elena across the table. His wrists were still zip-tied. He looked tired in the way that people look tired after they have put down something they have been carrying for a very long time. Marcus Webb, he said, Sarah Cho, David Reyes, James Park, Anna Kowalczyk. He said each name slowly with the full weight of someone who understood what they were. I cannot give them back, but I have given you what can give them back their names. She looked at him for a long time. It's enough, she said, and she meant it. Vance made the call to his contact at 0900. She didn't hear the conversation. She was outside the command building, sitting on the ground with her back against the wall and the rifle across her lap, and Holloway came and sat beside her without asking whether it was all right. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, I owe you an apology. She looked at him. The rifle, he said, what I said when you arrived, what I let the men say. He shook his head. That was wrong. She looked at the rifle in her lap, the worn stock, the barrel that had been cleaned 1,000 times, the scope that had found 3 positions in the dark that nobody else would have found. It's just a rifle, she said. It's not, he said, and you know it's not. She was quiet for a moment. It was my team leaders, she said. Marcus Webb, the real Marcus Webb, not our Webb, a different man, same name. She ran her thumb along the stock. He carried it for 11 years. He said it wasn't the equipment that mattered, it was the patience you brought to it. She paused. When he died, I took it. I wasn't going to leave it in that mountain. Holloway said nothing, but she heard him exhale, a slow, careful exhale of a man receiving information that changes the shape of something he thought he understood. I'm sorry, he said, not about the rifle, about all of it. I know, she said. Webb, their Webb gunnery sergeant. Marcus Webb came around the corner and stopped when he saw them sitting there. He looked at Elena. Vance's contact is moving, he said. He said it's enough to open a formal investigation, the kind that doesn't get closed. She closed her eyes just for a second, just long enough to feel what that meant. Then she opened them. Good, she said. There's more, Webb said. He crouched in front of her. His voice was level, but she could hear what was underneath it. The contact has access to the sealed incident report from 3 years ago. He says there's enough in Sorokov's testimony to formally reclassify the incident, to put it on record as what it actually was. He paused. Their names, Elena, full military recognition, the truth on record officially permanently. She didn't trust herself to speak for a moment. She looked at the rifle in her lap. Marcus Webb, Sarah Cho, David Reyes, James Park, Anna Kowalczyk, 5 people who had gone into a mountain and not come back. 5 people whose deaths had been wrapped in a lie and sealed away from the world, from their families, from the record of what they had actually done and actually been. 5 soldiers who had served with everything they had and received in return erasure. Not anymore. How long, she said. The contact said weeks, not months, Webb said. He's motivated. She nodded, looked up at the ridge. The sun was up now, full and flat across the eastern face of it, burning the night off the rock, making it look ordinary. Just a ridge, just a mountain, not the place where she'd spent 3 years worth of a war in the space of 2 days. Holloway stood, offered her a hand. She took it and got to her feet. At the gate, the supply truck that would take Sorokov to the forward holding facility was being prepped. She watched through the command building window as Webb and another Marine brought him out. He walked steadily. He didn't look toward the ridge. He looked briefly toward Elena, and she met his eyes, and they held the look for a moment, the particular complicated look of 2 people who have been each other's primary problem for 3 years and are now unexpectedly something more ambiguous than enemies. She didn't forgive him. That was not what the look was. But she understood him, and she understood that what he had done, the terrible, calculated, costly thing he had done in bringing her here and letting himself be caught, had given her the only thing that could actually finish this. Not revenge. Truth. The truck started, moved toward the gate, and she watched it go. Vance came to stand beside her. What happens to you now, he said. She thought about it She realized the first time in 3 years that she had thought about what came after. The hunt had been so total, so consuming that it had crowded out any consideration of the space on the other side of it. She had not thought about what she would be when it was finished, because finishing it had seemed abstract, hypothetical. A thing that existed in theory, but not in any future she could actually see. Now it was real. The future was standing right in front of her. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Vance nodded. That's a reasonable answer. I've been running towards this for 3 years, she said. I don't know what direction looks like when you're not running towards something. You'll figure it out, he said. People like you always do. She looked at him. People like me. People who don't quit, he said simply. She looked back at the gate where the truck had gone. At the ridge above it, ordinary now, in the morning light. At the base around her, the walls, the positions, the men moving through their morning routines with the particular aliveness of people who came close to something last night and are feeling in the way only proximity to that something can produce the specific, uncomplicated gratitude of still being here. She thought about 5 names. She thought about a rifle that had been carried for 11 years by a man who believed patience was more powerful than equipment. She thought about everything that rifle had seen. Everything it had done in the last 48 hours. Everything it had meant. She settled it on her shoulder. She was not running anymore. For the first time in 3 years, Elena Walker was not running towards something, or away from something, or carrying something that had no place to be set down. She was just standing on solid ground in the morning light, with the truth finally moving in the right direction, carried by people who could not be stopped toward a reckoning that could not be reversed. 5 names were coming back from the dark, and the woman who had refused to let them stay buried was finally completely irrevocably done running.